how this dialogics going on. And today's topic is specifically interested for various reasons. The protests which we see going on all coming up. So in that case, it is also interesting to have dialogue in dialogics on this topic. But before I hand over this session to Suraj, there are certain rules. Please be muted so that your background voice will not disturb speakers. We have two speakers. You can put in the chat box and direct it to Suraj, and then Suraj will open up for Q&A, and he will share your thoughts with speakers. And we are also live on YouTube. You can share that YouTube link across your circles. So with this, I am also thankful to all to our speakers for making time for this event and accepting our invitation. Suraj, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am actually speaking on two. One is my phone and one is on my laptop. So it's just because the internet is not good. But thank you so much. We are trying to assail this technological hangups. Thank you, Prashant. And welcome to everybody. This is our 5th in the series of Dialogics. And I am just so excited to welcome you all. Today's topic of discussion is interrogating caste privileges. This conversation came about when Mauktik actually reached out and he said, why don't we do something? And then we have been thinking about, and then we thought we should actually have such conversation going, and not only in our own spaces of how we interrogate caste, but also to define caste privileges, because usually the attention most often is given to the disadvantages that caste brings, but also to understand the wholesome problem. We also need to look at what caste also gives us when we partake into its institution. So there are many issues that kind of asymmetrically connect to us, do not connect to us. And I think that has to do with how we frame this debate, how we would like to continue its existence. And I think based on that, today's conversation is meant to inaugurate at least a new conversation. I think with our excellent speakers who are amazing people, whom I'm having a lot to learn from. But before I begin, just a quick my sort of intervention to this. We often, talk about caste in a very esoteric sense. It's almost an otherized sense. It's almost that we don't have to do anything. We don't have to do anything to do with caste. And yet caste is so precise. It's so palpable in whatever we do in our own circles. Caste has managed to retain our conscious and yet held us not accountable to it. Compared to the other struggles in America, for example, or elsewhere in racialized struggles, the apparent melanin content becomes one's affiliation to certain quote-unquote community or racial group. But in Indian context, one can be whatnot, but yet belong to a certain caste. You can be a dark skin and yet be a Brahmin or a Dalit or so forth and so forth. So there are various complicated layers that operate into caste, but still caste is known. We know each other's caste by each other's name, by each other's location, by each other's locations in the social circle. So because it's a symmetric institution, we would also like to pay adequate attention to how it plays out in defining our own relation to the privileges as well as not privileges. So here's just my a kind of a primer, if you will, what caste privileges would manifest and some of the basic facts, and these are just our pointers. And raise your hand if you are one of, if you feel this is connecting you. Some of the basic caste privileges could be as easy as to say, let's say, having to not know about one's caste, born into a specific networks, being poor but not being impoverished, having to not prove to anyone about one's name, origin, or identity, having relatives in important places and different towns, knowing someone from a foreign country, not having to account for your own wealth, control the resources without being responsible for it, inherit life traits that help you navigate in the world of caste and other politics, to feel like you own the world. You were growing up, you had maids, drivers, servants in the house. You called them with the first names. The elderly servants or maids or drivers called you as Malik, Choti Rani, Chote Malik, and so forth. You can afford to patronize the children by giving free tuitions. You were poor, but you didn't have to worry about dying of malnutrition or hunger. You open a TV and you see familiar names, food, gods, social circles. You had options. You feel like you own the world without even thinking about the consequences of that. You can go on a vacation. You can afford to be radical, revolutionary, progressive, liberal, so forth, without being necessarily doubtful about it. You can make mistakes and justify them. Your career path is known to you. You can dare to take risks. You have relatives who are in important positions in almost any sector you can find. You had mentors or access to people who you could consult to. You can go to college, university, or other higher educations just as a normal way of life. You can talk to your professors without barriers. You can cry about your oppression and you are sure you will be heard. You can fail and yet have options. Your parents and relatives do not have to collect someone else's human excreta on their head as a day job. Your uncle is a drunkard, but it's okay, he's an artist or he's going through some depression. Your father beats your mom, but that is domestic issue and not caste patriarchy. You can date a Dalit and get away with the repercussions. You can graduate your university degree without ever or having to know about caste issues. You have social clubs that you can easily get access to which you unknowingly belong to. You have had generations of people educated in your family. You did not have problems to worry about anyone harassing you or raping you for drinking the water from the village well. You can go to engineering and medical school and not worry about caste dynamics attached to your discipline. You can lament about Indian colonization by the British without having to worry about the colonizations of Dalits and Adivasis for over 3,000 years. You can declare that you worked in the caste movements and feel proud about it. You can be an expert and not have to worry about caste burden. You do not have to feel responsible for whatever you do in a caste society. This is a primer. Now let's go to our speaker. I would like to briefly introduce Nandita Das. We all know Nandita Das. We have been fan of Nandita Das for some time. She has acted in more than 40 feature films in 10 different languages. Polyglot it is. Her directional debut is in 2008 was Firaq, and she was also she was sitting on jury at the Cannes Film Festival twice. And I guess her social dynamics to her issue comes from because she perhaps has a master's degree in social work. And I think maybe that and is a strong advocate for, of course, social justice and human rights we have seen. But her more important campaign about the dark skin, the kind of supremacy of a fairer skin in India and the way she's countering is well notable. She was the chairperson of Children's Film Society and wrote a monthly column. I don't know how many people in the film industry have brains to write columns for 8 damn years.
No more deadline.
For a famous magazine, Be the Week, as we all know, and her recent work is on Manto. And her book about Manto and I chronicles about, in case people don't know, Saadat Hassan Manto, her 6-year journey of making the film. It's available in stores and online, and do recommend you to please go and watch it, and also buy the book. It's on Netflix. Come on now, we have a Netflix everywhere. But also, I would like to mention her honorable. She was conferred the Knight of the Order of Arts and Letters, given by the French government.
Stop with that can be seen online.
let me briefly introduce to our storyteller Mauktik. Mauktik is a neuroscientist. He is also a backpacker. He's been trading more than 50 countries, and I'm jealous already.
Wow.
He's been an author and exactly. He's a filmmaker, and he made a film about his India trails that he went, and his work is published, featured in National Geographic, Live Mint, Times of India. He has 2 master's degrees, one in biophysics and one is neuroscience from Johns Hopkins, and biophysics from Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois. He is also consultant to startups, and Mauktik was recently in as we call Charcha, but this is not Charcha on a tea, but it was Charcha of intellectual space, where he had identified his space as growing a Brahmin and how it comes to be reckoning as a Brahmin. So I will shut up. Over to you, Nandita, and then we'll go to Mauktik, and then we'll have a question and answers.
Let's start with Mauktik, so that I also kind of warm up, because I've come completely cold.
Okay.
You were the star here, but anyway, in the interest of time, I can. Thanks, Suraj, for this introduction and making this happen. When I look at your work and Nandita's body of work, I'm really a nobody when it comes to social issues or caste issues in India. And since the topic of today's discussion is interrogating caste privileges, I'm really the person who's in the dock here. I'm the indicted one. So some of you might know that I wrote an article about my caste privileges a week or 2 ago in Scroll, and that was the spark for today's conversation. And I would say till now, that's probably been the only contribution that I've had to this. So before we begin, I want to mention 2-3 things. Like, I don't have a background in social sciences or law or religious studies, but since I've done some research in neuroscience, I understand the importance of data. As they say, you can't understand things that you can't measure. So certainly, I have a lot of appreciation for what Suraj does. If you want to talk about social policies and laws in an informed way, we have to have the data. But I've also had the privilege of dabbling into creative writing and filmmaking. When I was listening to Suraj's introduction, I was like, man, he's just describing me. And through my first film, we tried to highlight some of the social, cultural problems in today's India. And in that process, I realized the power of storytelling, the power of images and videos. In India, because of films like Fandry, Sairat, and more recently Article 15, I feel like the caste discourse is changing a little bit. I've personally seen caste issues being discussed openly in households, and never cared to talk about them. And similarly, while we've known the statistics of racism in the US for several decades now, we recently saw the power of one tragic video. How it can have the power to raise our collective consciousness and force us to act. And I know, I'm aware that this is probably hypocritical. There's no dearth of images and videos of such atrocities in India. They keep surfacing almost every day. But a lot of them, they don't lead to any police complaint. Even if they do, they rarely get the media attention they deserve. But I think that's one of the things I'm looking forward to discussing today. How an image or a video has the power to raise our collective consciousness and talk about these social structures that create privileges for certain castes and huge barriers for others. So what's my story? I think my brainwashing started quite early in life. I'm from a small town called Jalgaon. There was a Muslim part of town, but the rest of the town wasn't physically segregated, or at least that's what I thought as a kid. A tiny little lane or gully, it was full of families from all walks of life. But as I found out later, we were absolutely segregated in our minds. I was growing up in an invisible bubble my family had created. So almost all of our family friends, granddad's friends, grandmom's friends, dad's friends, mom's friends, all of them exclusively upper caste, mostly Brahmins. So if we were hanging out with, friends outside school, it would end up being upper caste. And there was no such bubble in school. I actually went to a government school, Marathi medium till 10th, and it was not a convent. It was one of those 5 rupees a month school, that kind of school. My granddad was the chairman of that educational society. And in hindsight, I think that was the first sign of irony, or probably even hypocrisy in our home. My granddad was extremely passionate about education and worked tirelessly, till his last breath to expand educational opportunities for everyone. The kind of education he wanted for us was very skewed. He wanted us to get good grades, but didn't want us to hang out with kids from other castes or know anything about their lives and their upbringings. He would often ask me the last names of the kids I was hanging out with. And it took me years to realize why he would ask me those questions. The grandma's conduct was even more discriminatory. Back in the 30s, she was in the first batch of girls who went to college. And, as one of the few educated women of her generation, she headed a local remand home for juvenile reform center. As a freedom fighter, during the British rule, she had secretly distributed flyers to help resist the foreign occupation. And after independence, she headed an NGO for women's economic empowerment for quite a few years. But it was a completely different avatar back home. The maid couldn't be anywhere around the gods. Cook had to be Brahmin. And as terrible as it sounds, I'm sure most of our listeners today are not surprised by it. That's what I call casual casteism in India. When I look back, that strange kind of childhood, where the oppressor had decided what the role of the oppressed was supposed to be, and I rarely witnessed any resistance from the oppressed. In a nutshell, that was my worldview. Since almost all the other homes I visited as a child had similar rules, I just assumed that, these were the rules of the universe. And that continued in college. I wasn't in Jalgaon anymore at that point. I had moved to Pune for engineering. But consciously or subconsciously, all the friends I made were upper caste again. Those same what's your last name questions, they would come up whenever, every time I visited my friends' homes. But I still refused to learn anything from it. As you can imagine, college curriculum only made it worse. The history we had learned back then was, a lot of Shivaji, Mughal rulers, British Raj. And engineering had nothing about sociology, humanities, religious studies, zero. So I was practicing. Sorry.
Mauktik,
Mauktik,
your voice is cracking. Can you please talk? Can you please talk louder and little closer to the mic?
Closer to the mic. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it is better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I was so the engineering curriculum that I was talking about had nothing about sociology, humanities. It's like I was practicing this caste system every day and I was completely ignorant of it. My only goal in life, just like most of the engineering kids of the 90s, was finish engineering, take a GRE out of India. And it was almost like I get out of India and all my problems in life are magically going to be over, right? And as I mentioned in that article, all we learned was physics and math. No, they weren't teaching anything about humanity because they were probably not training us to be humans. They were just training us to be robots. Just become engineers and get a good salary and that's your life. So I think the first time I woke up to this reality was around age 22, 23 maybe, when I was studying neuroscience in the US. I was learning a lot about brain development. And, moving from India to the US, there are those, typical discussions about, oh, now I'm doing all my chores and, being responsible for myself. That's something that a lot of people talk about. But in neuroscience, I finally learned what deprivation and negative emotions in childhood can, how it can completely change the trajectory of brain development. Not just a development in different brain regions, but even the expression of different chemicals in the brain is very closely tied to the kind of environment you grow up in. The diversity and richness of your surroundings. It's all sort of important to your development. If you're the oppressor, just like Suraj said, sky is the limit. And if you're the subjugated, you can't even aim too high. And the seeds of such glass ceilings are created in childhood. So that's when I really started putting two and two together. It naturally led to some self-loathing, anger about my upbringing, those kinds of things. But from that age, from age 22, 23, it took me another decade or so to finally do some course correction and, find some peace of mind. I mean, get to the stage where I can openly discuss these issues. I'm pretty sure that most of my friends who've logged in right now are not there yet. They won't admit this blatant discrimination in their homes out in the public. Or maybe they've just, convinced themselves that, this discrimination is right. But this didn't come naturally to me, this sort of, questioning myself. I could have found a, cushy job in the US, perpetuated, all these social structures back home. I constantly had to ask these uncomfortable questions to myself. Solo traveling became my companion in a way. I backpacked a lot around the world, covered some 50 countries. But that gave me the peace of mind and more importantly, the time to reflect and reassess my choices. And that kind of brainwashing can often take a long time to get rid of. And I'm sort of testimony to that fact. And then I bumped into the world of filmmaking. It was a total accident, but I just wanted to share the, joys of backpacking with the world. Again, this is my privilege talking. I can afford to talk about the joys of backpacking by making a film. But I was traveling in India to make this backpacking film. We were trying to capture the contradictions of India, social, cultural, economic contradictions. And we went to this city called Azamgarh in eastern UP. Some of you might know Azamgarh is, I think, the place where Shabana Azmi is from. And we were actually chasing a story of something called Mritak Sangh or Dead People Society. I don't know how many of you heard about it. But these are people who are alive, but the system has declared them dead. So if I am your brother or your sister and I want your property, I'll just bribe a bunch of officials, get a death certificate issued in your name, and grab your property. Now, this guy, unfortunately, has to fight the entire legal system just to prove that he's alive. There's this guy in Azamgarh who has set up an entire association of some, 1,000 people who are alive, but they've been declared dead by the system. And even when I was filming this, it was like, it didn't really sink in, it was a story that I was trying to cover, that's all. But, the more I started thinking about it and reflecting, I realized that terrible human tragedy, predominantly marginalized castes. It was not just the upper castes that were rendering marginalized caste invisible, or even constantly questioning their status in public life. Even our government, the apparatus was so broken, it still is, that, it's made them legally invisible. So, I mean, any of our listeners are talking about CA and NRC, I would urge you to read about Mritak Sangh or, watch our film, and then we can have a more informed debate about proving your citizenship, But anyway, in the process of making and then showing this film, I realized the power of, storytelling and the power of media. Governments obviously create their own narratives, politicians, just like upper caste, their primary interest is, not to lose their power. And they'll do whatever it takes to perpetuate it. But I think that's where the critical role of the media also comes in. Its primary job is to speak truth to power and highlight injustice. But, stories of subjugated caste, they don't get highlighted. There's not enough attention paid to them, or maybe the wrong kind of attention to, gets paid to them. Just last night, I was thinking about, Sushant Singh Rajput's unfortunate suicide. And it immediately took me back, to the media circus that followed Rohit Vemula's suicide. I mean, just think about it, right? I mean, both were physicists. I mean, both, it's just so stark that, both used to dream about, galaxies and black holes and stars. And, Rohit's death, it just became a media circus about his caste, the tragedy of that human loss completely disappeared, maybe just disappeared in some black hole. And Sushant Singh, on the other hand, nothing against him, but, he quit physics, became a star. His suicide leads to a discussion about mental health and, the culture in the film industry. That is the stark reality we live in, I mean, and I can go on and on. Sure, all of you know about these things or have at least thought about it. But that's the world we live in. And, that's been my journey so far. I'll wrap up in a minute. But, when I think about this, maybe the fact that our hometown is still small, it made my journey a little bit tricky. When my granddad was on his deathbed, the last thing he did was to donate all of his life savings to upgrade a girls' school, primary school. That's how much he cared about expanding education. And my dad is also a doctor, cancer specialist. He was in the US, moved back to Jalgaon in 1984, to take care of his parents. Left a promising career in the US. He probably would have been a millionaire by now if he had stayed in the US. But for the past 35, 40 years, he's been offering cancer treatment in a part of India where no other oncologist wants to go. So it becomes very difficult to say anything negative about them because compared to them, look at my life. I haven't achieved much, So I also know that, anyone who's gone through an oppressed childhood, I know these mental struggles that I'm talking about they sound very trivial or superficial. And I'll agree with you. I don't think I've ever had to face oppression myself. And I was essentially brainwashed to believe that we were somehow superior. And it took me a long time to correct that. It's really nothing compared to someone who has been constantly humiliated or physically abused throughout his childhood and has questioned his self-worth all the time. But although I haven't experienced it, I at least know the full story now and regret what we've done to others over the years. And maybe in closing, I think the most ironic part of my story is that I've always been a staunch atheist. I don't remember a single day in my life when I believed in any kind of God. And yet, I never questioned this discrimination that happens in the name of God. I have to say that my parents are not as strict as my grandparents, in terms of casteism. It's changing, generation by generation, there is slow change. But they still maintain some of those discriminatory practices at home. Oh, they're going to be mad at me for saying all of this in public. But I hope you'll find some satisfaction in having raised a son who's at least restless about it and keeps asking questions until he gets the moral clarity about what is right and what is wrong. It took me a long time to get here, but I finally know I'm on the right side of history. So I think that's where I'll end my gyan, if you will. And over to Suraj or Nandita.
Yeah, Nandita, you can take over now.
Yeah. No, it was, I think, fascinating to hear Mauktik. I'm sure that's the story of many people, and like you said, you're on the right side of history. So शाम का भूला क्या सुबह का भूला अगर शाम को घर लौट आए तो उसको भूला नहीं कहते, kind of a thing. But I had some similarities, some differences. In fact, when Suraj, you were listing the things that, makes many of us so entitled. And I was thinking how many boxes are being checked, and some were and some weren't. So I had a little bit of a different life. My parents, my father is a painter, mother a writer, far more bohemian. Both were not religious, so I didn't have to rebel or defy. Um, we grew up in a kind of, in fact, there were no isms. Like they were not very political seemingly, but so there was no secularism and feminism and even, religiosity or atheism. Nothing of the sort was there. Yet they were extremely inclusive. My father would cook and clean, so there was, treated me and my brother the same. So in many ways, I fitted into the box of growing up in a liberal household. When we would go to our grandparents, my father is from Odisha, my mother is from Gujarat. So, every summer holidays, we would go 1 month to a small town called Baripada in Odisha and 1 month to Bombay. So the Odisha part, my grandmother, like, many of these old traditional families were religious. So I would go with them to the temple. But for me, it was like a more cultural kind of a thing, because at home we never prayed. We had no deity, no murti. Even today you won't find any, but even in my growing up years, it wasn't there. Whereas in my mother's place, it was both her parents were in the national movement. They were Gandhians. So I grew up, in fact, more stories of Gandhi in my childhood. And there was and I was kind of thinking, that's Gandhi is our savior and, the father of the nation. And we never really talked so much about Ambedkar. There was not much conversation, whatever one read in history books. But Gandhi was the real leader, and also because of this familial history of both my grandparents being very close associates of Gandhi's, and so it was a different history that I heard about. And Suraj, when you said I did my master's in social work, I don't think a degree makes you a better or worse social worker. But what it does is it does expose you to many different realities. Less theoretical, because we also did field work, and I had something called the block field work, where after 2 years you go to a place and you work there. And I chose to go to this district in Odisha called Phulbani. And I thought, I'm in Odia, I speak reasonably good Odia, and I'll be able to understand everything. And I went, and it was a completely tribal area, and they spoke Kui, and not one word did I understand. And slowly through my days of social work and then doing street theater with Safdar Hashmi, slowly I think that was in many ways my political training, I would say. Then work with various NGOs, and it was only then that I slowly started understanding that there is such a natural exclusion that happens at every stage. When you don't have friends from, and one of the boxes that you, Suraj, said, that when you don't know your caste. I didn't know my caste till college. I mean, if you ask me details of it, I wouldn't know it even now. And when I would travel to the US and people would ask me, is there casteism? And I would say, yeah, there is a lot of casteism. But, it hasn't played any role in my life. But if it hasn't played a role in your life, that in itself tells you enough that you've been privileged, that you have, you've been on the other side of history, as Mauktik puts it, and you have been complicit in some ways. So, so my early exposures to the issue was through various different activists. I was also on certain panels. And I remember one particular panel where I was to speak after this Dalit activist, and she narrated such horrific forms of oppression. I can never forget that, because she talked about how this child's each hair was being pulled out to teach him a lesson, because he had come to a school that was not meant for him. And I was so speechless after that. And I said, nothing I say is of any worth at all. I don't want to say anything. I've come here to learn. I thought I would speak. And till then, I thought I would speak about even my caste privileges, and I wanted to engage. But it had gone beyond the intellect. So I went through that phase of feeling terribly guilty for my privileges and, wanting to kind of correct it. But I think guilt is not a positive emotion. All of us have not chosen to be in a particular caste or a particular religion or particular skin color or even gender or what have you. These are all our given identities, and we are being defined by that. The tragedy is that instead of defining ourselves and each other by how we think and what we do, and how do we react to situations and all of that, we are defining ourselves and each other by our given identities where we played absolutely no role. And in fact, I've often talked about these things, about that I have multiple identities, and please don't put me in any one box. Though I have to say, in all those multiple identities, the identity that most maybe that I couldn't, that probably takes precedence over other identities, was the identity of being a woman. And I think in a different way, one can kind of understand what it is to be pushed to the wall, what it is to constantly be reminded of. Like, that's an identity, not that because I embrace it more or I like it more. I think we are made of so many different things, but this identity takes precedence because I'm never allowed to forget that I'm a woman, whether for better or for worse. So in some strange way, maybe a tiny bit, I understand what it is to constantly be reminded of that what caste you're in. So I've had a very strange kind of a relationship with the issue, because I always wanted to get more involved, and I somehow didn't know where to start because of that natural kind of exclusion that has happened. When you don't have enough friends in school, you don't have enough, not enough, but like barely anybody from lower castes, or what we call, even using those words higher and lower, when you don't even situate yourself there, is kind of uncomfortable, but lack of a better word, any word seems like a wrong word, because then you're kind of saying that, okay, that's the identity. And I just didn't know how to deal with it. And I used to go during my college days, or even after that, after especially I was working with an NGO, and we would work in villages, and in the villages it's much more stark, like people are segregated, and we would try and work around it, and we realized it was so difficult. And you're 22, 25, you're idealistic, you want to change the world, you want everyone to be equal, and you never want to lose that idealism, even if you're foolish, even at my age. But you start also becoming realistic. So I had this phase of feeling sort of guilty and kind of seeing how could I correct it. And then at some level there was a little bit of peace in knowing that, okay, the only way you can do something about it is by doing something about it, by talking about it, by not shying away from it. Or so while I did not see any direct oppression, but the fact that there were barely anyone from the community that was in my world, that in itself is such an exclusion. That in itself keeps you away from it. That is, it's almost like it's hidden in plain sight. And when something is not part of your world, you don't engage with it, you don't talk about it. And so even though I wanted to be more engaged, I realized I didn't know who to really turn to. And that's why when Mauktik in fact told me to come on this panel, I was like, yeah, I want to go, and it'll be cathartic for me, but I want to hear everyone. And because like you said, Mauktik, or uncomfortable questions, you want to constantly be uncomfortable, because if you're not, that means you're not alive, because there is so much of injustice all around you. How can you be comfortable? And every conversation that makes you uncomfortable, I think is helping you become more human. So so I've had many engagements with it in different ways. I did a Marathi film called Mati Mai, and the reason I liked that script, because many other films that I had done, the trajectory was, the arc of the character was, here is an ordinary woman who's faced with extraordinary situations, and she brings out a certain strength. Those typical women feminist kind of characters, where you then become extraordinary through your inner strength, or you rebel and you protest. Whereas Mati Mai's story, I don't know if you've seen it, it's based on Mahashweta Devi's story called Bayan. It is about a very confident woman whose job is to bury little children. That's the job that she does. And she does it because her father used to do it, and he was from the Dome caste. And when he stopped doing it, and she didn't have a brother, she had to naturally do it. And she used to say that, I forget the dialogues, but something about Dev, like, this is Bhagwan ka kaam hai, this is God's work. And she did it with pride. And when she becomes pregnant and she has a child, she doesn't want to do it anymore. So she goes to the panchayat and says, you know what, I don't want to do this job anymore. And it's only then she realizes that it wasn't even a choice, that she doesn't have a choice to do or not do. She is meant to do that because that's her caste, that's her job. And then it's an opposite arc where this confident, amazing woman whose husband loves her and all of that slowly begins to realize that what I did was not a choice. It was just that I was meant to do. And she resists because she's this feisty woman, and she resists and she protests and she gets angry, and there's a plague. So there are lots of these deaths happening, but she just has to continue doing her work. And because she rebels and she chooses not to, but she's still concerned about the place where these children are buried. So she keeps going there, making sure that the wolf and the foxes don't come and dig it out and all of that. That slowly they start saying that this woman is a witch. And slowly she starts getting ostracized, and she's completely ostracized, and she starts believing that she's a witch. And for her, the last straw is when her supportive husband also decides that, she's a witch. And somehow doing that film and doing sort of an opposite arc of what society can do to you, what society can do to a feisty woman, but just because she belongs to a caste where there are no choices, you just do what you're told, what you're supposed to do. And I don't know, it sort of changed. I think sometimes, characters also give you so much. And then I started lately, like Mauktik said, there were films, whether it's Fandry. Fandry was very powerful for me, and that was one of the most powerful. And also Neeraj Ghaiwan did a film called Masan, so those were really powerful films that I saw. Ranjit Pada's films in the South. But there is so little representation everywhere. How can we tell stories, about the caste politics, the caste suffering, the oppression that is so blatant, the caste privileges? They are very, very, there have been films, but they are so simplistic. Also because they've been made by upper caste people who may be genuinely empathetic, but, they don't bring in those complexities that exist in reality. And we've hardly seen those films. So there is a natural exclusion from everything that's mainstream, if we can call it. And I like doing informal surveys. So I talk to a lot of people who may not belong directly to my world, and I'm actually shocked the kind of ignorance, and some of it is just unconscious bias. It's not even conscious. They just don't care. And it's time that we really call it out, because I know when Rohit Vemula committed suicide and there was all this conversation, and I was deeply, deeply disturbed, and I was talking to someone, and he said, who, sorry, what's his name, what happened? I said, it was in the front page of the news, you didn't see it? And this person knows me well, and so he said, well, when Sensex figures come, you don't see it. You once told me that you don't see that even if it's in big bold letters. And I had said, when you don't want to see something, you just don't see it. And it's true, because I don't understand all these markets and shares and blah, blah, blah. So I don't look at it. And I was shocked, and I did an informal survey, and I was shocked to know that how many people did not even read that news, even though it was upfront out there. Because when you don't care, it's not part of your world, it doesn't make any difference. So it's something that's deeply, deeply, sort of bothered me. And it's in the last 2 years I've been, and this is the first time I'm even sharing. I haven't shared it with anybody, at least publicly. Very few people, maybe 2 or 3 people know that I'm actually working on a script about this issue. And it's strange, because the reality constantly just catches up. The reality is so stark that what can you show in a film that's going to move people, not just sort of cry and feel bad and patronize or, feel sympathetic, but actually moves them both mentally and emotionally in a way that would disturb them for a long time after the film's finished. So I'm working on something, and I would also like to talk to Suraj and others. I know you'll all have questions, but my question is also that sometimes there is this debate that because you're from an upper caste and whatever, to be honest, I'm still confused as to which exact caste I am, but what does it give you the right to tell the story? will I ever understand it? Does it give me the entitlement to do it? Is it wrong to do it? I personally feel we have to tell each other stories. This is how they divide us also. Any kind of orthodoxy wants to be divided. And also, I mean, nature's story has to be told. This pandemic has taught us that, nature is kind of really angry because we've abused it. And nature's story has to be told by us humans who are the oppressors and the abusers. So I don't know, but I'd love to hear. And of course, I'd like a lot of people whose lived experiences, if they can share and they can make the script better, help me at every stage with their talent, with their thoughts, with their arguments. I want to make a truly, truly sensitive and a genuine, authentic film, which is nuanced and complex and which kind of churns your stomach, because that is what we need. We need to churn our souls and stomach, because we've just let it happen for so long, and we have always kind of normalized, and which is so, it makes you sick. That's such a deep oppression and violence that happens all around us, and we just declare figures that now we are free of humans come enjoy and things like that. I mean, so it's something that I deeply care about, and I hope that it's going to be a divide of those who are privileged and not. I don't want to come from a place of guilt, but from a place of understanding and coming closer and not creating us on the basis of caste.
I think Nandita might have dropped.
Yeah,
Mauktik, are you there?
I'm here. I actually also got dropped and came back, so I think it is happening for some reason. But yeah, I think it's your turn now. So please.
No, I think it happened with me also. So clearly there is some problem with the. So Mauktik, still because Nandita was almost done. Why don't you said you would like to jump in and then you wanna take the conversation, or how do you prefer?
Sure. So I was part of the last conversation as well, and perhaps this is my ignorance. I for so many years I had never gotten an opportunity to hear about the angst and the revolutionary zeal regarding this issue. But one of the things that struck me in the conversation last week was that there is this extremely strong feeling about getting rid of Hinduism completely if we want to create a new kind of society. And I've had some time to think about it for the last week. I think I even emailed you some of my thoughts. So this is what I struggle with a lot. I've never been never really considered myself to be a Hindu, or even to pray to any god for that matter. But I also feel, having studied a little bit of psychology and neuroscience, that there is this innate urge. A lot of people either because it makes them do good things, or it alleviates their fear of the unknown. That urge for religion is very strong. So even a friend of mine here in Venezuela, she's from Venezuela, and she talks about extremely left liberal. Like, I don't know anybody else who's more left liberal, but she still goes to church every Sunday, and it gives us some peace of mind. So I just wanted to for you to talk a little bit about this. I mean, I still feel that there are certain inherent things in Hinduism that resonate with the world, and maybe there are certain good things, but maybe I'm completely wrong. So I would love for you to talk about your upbringing and how Hinduism has constantly been that bad influence in your life, and where this balance is. I mean, can there be a Hinduism that is not invested in caste anymore, but still a force for good? So
Um,
Hello?
Thank you so much,
Sorry,
Mauktik.
sorry Suraj, my line dropped, and everyone else as well. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
So,
you're not alone.
Okay, anyway, I was almost finishing. I was just getting a bit almost emotional. So,
Nandita, sorry, Nandita, I just followed up your, opening remarks with a
yeah,
question.
no, I heard you. I heard the last bit and I figured what you were saying.
Oh, great. Yeah, then Suraj, please take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Mauktik. And Nandita, as I was saying, we have some technical difficulty, but I think we are still having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm doing it now on my phone, so sorry, it's a bit.
Well, I am on my phone, as I said, on my screen. So, there were a few points that I kind of picked up from your deposition as well as Mauktik. And there are various ways. I think this is a conversation that within the dominant caste circles, there is a very little space to have such kind of candid conversation without getting into a so-called big fight, where even any sort of rational thought comes. And this is because I've been mentoring, especially at Harvard, and where I meet many dominant caste kids. Most of them are from Brahmin or the Baniya backgrounds. And when they come to United States, they have a certain moment in their life where they would really like to have this moment, if you know what I mean. And I think in that context, I would like to offer a set of few comments. One is, especially Nandita, you're a field, the one you operate in, and it's not a pushback on you individually, but I think the film industry, and you and Mauktik have emphasized the importance of that culture that we kind of continue to display. I mean, I think it's intellectually malnourished. There are dumb as fuck people in the industry. Well, especially because I operate in both circles, so I could say and people, especially from the industry, have especially Bollywood, have approached me to say, would you like to work on scripts and all? And the way they approached was like, they are not committed to the cause. They are committed to a certain glitz and glitter. And that was very, and these were Muslims, by the way, filmmakers. And so it's not only against, what I'm saying is the way that you're mute. Nandita, you're on mute.
Sorry. No, I said it's not only about, I don't think we should generalize that all Hindus are like this or all Muslims are like this.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, so we shouldn't make it too simplistic.
Exactly. So, so the way we look at these issues, for example, is something the white people in America do, especially with academy. The Oscar Academy has recently come out with the revised list, and recently they have kind of, especially after this George Floyd, they have come to
of course, it's huge.
And Michael Jordan, for example, the film actor said, he called out of Hollywood and say, how many directors, how many assistants you have that belong to the black community. That conversation in India is almost like talking to Pluto.
Yeah.
So I think, and here's the irony. Will Smith comes to one of the IFA awards, and all the Khans and kings and Bashas and whatever names we have literally genuflect, which is great. While at the same time, there is a very little investment. So the wannabe kind of appreciation of and why do we say this? Is because I think people have invested in the film industry, right? So for example, I've never seen in the films, in the main water films, pork or beef being served into the food. It's always paneer, dal, chawal. A very, very Brahmin-centered food, you know. So there are like a lot of cleavages that kind of one operates into, and we are talking about quarter population of India,
Yeah.
who is totally absent from the way
unrepresented. Yeah.
And then even when we think about the marriages, basic marriage still, the Saath Fere, or
Yeah.
it's a very Khatri marriage, Punjabi marriage, if you will.
Yeah.
I was doing. So there is a lot that one can appeal, only appeal. The least we can do. Mauktik, I'll just go back to your point of you asking me about the religion. See, I think the understanding of problem has to come to it has to feature. Then we can go about establishing a critical credence about where do we belong in this large scheme of things. Meaning, when you say Hinduism or not, I think that's a conversation that we can have perhaps secondary or third, not secondary, second stage or third stage. The first stage is, are we seriously going to have a critical conversation on it? Why do I say that? Because the church that your Venezuelan friend was going and attending had an investment in the people's struggle. Although church had a very atrocious past, don't get me wrong on that, as an institution. But church could also bring forward a pastor called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A mosque could bring out an icon called Malcolm X, who becomes the minister of the. In India, you tell me how many church, how many mosques, and how many Hindu temples have solemnly declared their commitment to abolishing untouchability, and that would mean getting on the turf of, and I use this word in a very loose end, but getting on a war front to say, where a temple priest will say, if there is a caste-based atrocity in this village, I will not let anyone enter the temple, or I will not serve. An incident where people have said the caste-based inter-caste couple are eloping, or there is a huge problem. We as a temple, as a responsible institution, will make sure the temple acts as a refuge space for person of any caste, whoever want to live. We haven't seen those reforms. Even the 19th century Arya Samajists were dominated by Brahmins, and they wanted to create a Hindu sort of a domain for an anti-colonial project. So the history is complicated in a way that people are out there to serve or pretend that their investment in a religious principle is very much of a spiritual meaning to the unknown God, whatnot. And Mauktik, the problem is with the Brahmin atheists or the Brahmin agnostics, because they literally wash away their hands of their responsibilities. It's like white saying, I don't believe in race. Well, bro. Or like me as a male saying, I don't believe in gender. I don't see you as a man and woman. I have no investment. I all think is you all are one. This is a hypocrite position.
Exactly.
I understand my status as a male, as a heterosexual cis male in a patriarchal society that is homophobic and transphobic. I just cannot afford to be only male. I have to be anti-sexism, anti-homophobia, anti-every woman oppression. Absolutely. That I might or might not commit. But I need to stay vigilant to that. And doesn't mean I will practice my private anti-sexism ethic. I have to be vocal. If I have a voice, if I have a pen, and if I have an audience, and audience need not be 1 million people, 50,000 people. It can
we all
your
have
3 family members, or
no,
your own company networks.
So Suraj, a couple of things that really jumped out when you were talking about these issues. I mean, one was the Amy Cooper video that came out of New York, right? And that was just like you said, you can be this left liberal, oh, I'm not racist. And the moment you get in trouble, it is so easy to fall back on that privilege that, you don't even realize it. And even after the incident, she went public and said, I'm not a racist. I mean, if you've done that, you are a racist, right? How do you deny that? And then I think the second point I wanted to make related to your comments was, even in Islam and Christianity in India, that is the sad part, that, these were the religions that were supposed to give you the emancipation, but in Indian Islam and Indian Christianity, we still see the caste system, which is
Yeah.
so unfortunate. So yeah, I mean, it's absolutely sad. So that's one thing. And then the other question I sort of had in mind, for both you and Nandita as well. I mean, we have seen some level of political power now, right? Over the past 50, 60, 70 years. We've seen leaders like Kashiram or Mayawati, back home, even somebody like Samant. These people, they managed to get to a position of power, but it was almost, from my perspective, this might be a completely prejudiced and sort of a, ignorant perspective, but it almost had that Animal Farm kind of quality, right? You get into power and then you become just a power broker. And I wanted you, or, probably Nandita, to address this. So why political, some level of political empowerment, why hasn't translated into social change? I mean, maybe it's just that the politicians get the power, but it's, the entire administrative structure that is still hopelessly, caste based. Maybe that is one of the things. But, would love to hear your perspectives on that.
I'm not really clear, Mauktik, because your voice was crackling. Are you asking? Sorry, there's somebody who's not muted. Could you please mute? Because in between there's some other sound coming. Thank you.
Yeah. So
You're
just to
saying?
Just a minute. I will mute everybody, so
Yeah.
they won't be able to join. Just a second, okay?
Because, yeah. And there are a lot of
I-
questions coming on the chat. I hope somebody is reading them and bringing.
Right.
Okay. Good to go. Yeah. So just to briefly reframe my question, I've noticed that, there has been some level of political empowerment, but it hasn't really translated into, social change to the extent that we would like to see. So, it had that, as I said, almost that Animal Farm kind of quality where, you get political power and then you suddenly become a power broker, nothing else, right?
Yeah, but why is that question to me? I mean, I think Suraj, Suraj would be probably.
No, because Nandita, you've also been a social worker and you've probably seen.
Yeah, but but that is true of everything. In our country, look at the politics today. Tell me which issue. I mean, I go to different places and people say, "Why don't you do a film about this?" And about like even women, we are half the population. If you see the representation, whether women behind the camera, the kind of oppression, the kind of abuse. So what are we talking about? A larger issue of caste, which anyway is completely like it's like a blacked out thing. So film, like Suraj, you were saying, why are they serving paneer and why is there Sat Fera? Because those are the people who dominate the industry. It's largely been North Indian. South Indians have complained we are always in a caricaturish kind of a role. Muslims have complained that we are always, seen, our stories are diminishing. So in every possible dark skin, I mean, people, just because you're born in a particular skin, that too in a country which is 90% like this or 80% at least of various shades of brown, we are all sort of in some shades of brown, and we are being told that we are not good enough. So we are constantly battling. So I think that is almost a given. We have to know, how do we resist? How do we change the narrative? And like you said, we all have an area of influence, whether it's 3 people in the family, it's friends. How do we become more inclusive instead of just building those walls that, yes, you're different? How do And that's where I finished, was that let's not create just a they and us. Maybe it's easier for me to say that. Again, maybe it's my privilege that I'm saying that, but I feel this us, whether it's in the name of religion, caste, whatever, if we are truly liberal and inclusive, we need to change that vocabulary. All of us have to come together and fight it, whether I do it through a film or a conversation, you do it through, your talks, whatever. All of us have to be truly much more engaged in these issues than we have been before.
Right. To reply to your question, Mauktik, I think it really requires a sort of a political / social conversation on that. I will try to answer very briefly because I won't be able to justify that. But what you have expressed is an anxiety of the Brahmin or the Brahminical caste, where when they see a woman in position of power, let's say she's a Dalit woman, that's basically a death warning for a Brahminical system. Because A, she is a Dalit. We're talking about Mayavati. 2, she's a woman. Now, those two combinations are never going to work with any patriarchal caste system, where usually the males of the Brahmin castes have dominated and precluded that whatever they say, Brahma, whatever they say is the truth and is a final word. I think we just have to then draw an inspiration from how this sort of comes about. Where then do we play our part in this? Why do I say that is, when you say Animal Farm and all, I think the media has not at all paid any attention to whatsoever to this issue. And I think this is where I would like to invite you, Mauktik, and also Nandita and others for to do a little bit of investigation as to how this caste power plays and how the media reports or misrepresents. Now we have Mayavati is accused. She's not proven. She is accused of corruption and whatnot. The case is still going on in the court. But now tell me, Mauktik, how many times Brahmins committed blunder and you took the responsibility of it? Or did anyone come to you and say, Mauktik, look what these Brahmins are doing? For example, Vijay Mallya, a Kannadiga Brahmin, looted 7,500 crores and lived the lavish life, gets a lot of recognition, yet nobody talks about it. Now you might say, no, he's not a politician, he is. I will give you another example. The Chara Ghotala that Lalu Prasad Yadav is right now, in prison for, that he inherited that. That Chara Ghotala was made by his predecessor Mishra. Mishra was a Brahmin, a chief minister. And then you can add this list to the scale. Sheila Dikshit. Sheila Dikshit was the chief minister of Delhi during the Commonwealth Games. The kind of difficulties they had created, and Commonwealth was an embarrassment, an international embarrassment. But similarly, the Commonwealth guy who was from Pune, another Brahmin, committed this Commonwealth scam. Do we have any recognition of that? Then I wrote this in my book, in my final chapter, as to how corruption of Brahmin Banyas gets written off as an individual and not as a caste. Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, looters, scoffing off the country's wealth, literally in a highway robbery, took the public wealth. The money that belonged to the people that were deposited in the bank, the banks gave them money, and every year, I was talking to a friend who's a banker, who's a bureaucrat actually, shared with me the number of the amount, how much of the banks write off. And of that, if you look at the name of the companies and their last names, none of these are Dalits, none of these are Adivasis. So what we do essentially is bring out our extreme insecurities about an assertion of a Dalit voice and make it a very conflated understanding of where they are coming from. I will give you another example.
Mm-hmm.
The historic monuments that these people build, temples, big kind of, you go in any most of the ministerial locations where they have their constituencies, you will see the kind of investment they have made in infrastructure, especially for temples and other reasons that glorify themselves. And by the way, these are not political party leaders. These are just one of the leaders, which are, what I mean by that is they are not the presidents of their parties, unlike my law. Yet they create their own fiefdom. They already have thousands and thousands of acres of land. They already have a wealth that they've inherited, which is not their making. That's why I say, if Dalits are given, and more importantly, Dalit women are given a compensation or remuneration, if you will, of their hard work, then they potentially will be one of the most richest countries. If India is at all a country of meritocratic leaning. What we do is meritocratic leaning of an ideology is protested when it comes to reservation of backward classes, the OBCs or scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. But the same meritocratic idea is not applied to the economically weaker section of the upper caste.
Yeah.
This is the kind of brutish hypocrisy that we continue to live in.
Right.
Final point as to a response is we have not understood other person, but we have made a perception of other person. This is a very important distinction. Mm-hmm. In India, we talk about Muslims, they are this and that. We talk about Dalits, that they are this and that, without adequately knowing their lived reality, their own story. That's why I say the medium, the culture, as well as other medium, doesn't adequately emphasize or give a wholesome picture. And that's why many undergraduates or graduates who I meet here who are from India, and by the way, who come to Harvard and Columbia, you would imagine, come from one of the elite families. Their issue consistently has been, why were they oppressed? Because the irony of Indian caste society is the oppressor feels him or herself as oppressed. There is no element of acknowledgement of their position that is given by a default oppressor. Yeah. Now, I might, or anyone might in this audience, claim that they are poor and they have a different issue, they have difficulty getting admission, they had less marks and all. This is the kind of escape route that is often given, but there is no soul searching. And that's why the religion that we talk about, or religious institutions, they have failed because they have not offered what in Greek tradition of Socrates was to be a truth searching through your own critical analysis. In India, we seldom do self-criticism. We always blame anything or almost everything on the weaker person, and that's why Dalits get blamed, and that is why the reason 2G scam was blamed on A. Raja, who was a minister in NDA government, who was a Dalit. Had A. Raja not been a Dalit, and by the way, A. Raja is acquitted, but an entire movement of India against corruption was created by blaming on one person, and this Brahmin Baniya media controlled, and by the way, media, you all know, 83% of the media is controlled by single-handedly Brahmins. The editors are Brahmin caste. Now you tell me, 3.5% of Brahmins in India control 83% of India's narrative. You'll get the answer.
No, absolutely. I'll just add one quick point. We should probably take questions from the audience, but I absolutely
My video is switched off. I don't know, Suraj. I think you have to switch it on. I'm not being able to switch on the video, but that's fine. I mean, I don't mind. I'm just letting you know that it's from your end.
Oh, is that right? Sorry, my bad.
No. That's okay. I just want to.
So I'll just add one quick comment to what Suraj was saying. You know, after my article in Scroll came out, a very good friend of mine replied to me saying that, oh, Brahmins have been known this, community of knowledge and renunciation. And, he had a long email and all of that. So my first and shortest response to that email was, who defined Brahmins as the community of knowledge and renunciation? And I said, until we accept that there are just as many corrupt people and rapists and looters in Brahmins as any other caste, we will never take this discourse anywhere else. As long as we keep pretending that, oh, we are the Brahmins, we do the work of God, and how can we be corrupt? Until that changes, until we do some self-reflection and realize that statistically Brahmins are equally, uh, complicit or responsible in, corruption, looting, rape, what have you. We will never go far. So I'll end there. Nandita, you want to add some thoughts, so we can take
I
some.
just want to say that, at some level, this whole meritocracy has also become a huge problem. We think of it as a good thing. Maybe it's a gift of capitalism or whatever, that everyone should be chosen on the basis of their merit. I think that in itself is a very faulty way of structuring things. When there is an exclusion from your education institutions, both primary to higher education, then how do you base that merit? How do you correct a historical wrong on the basis of merit? So it seems very logical. I was in college when the Mandal Commission had happened. I was doing my master's, and I remember sort of joining pro Mandal Commission, and my God, the kind of protest and the kind of anger there was at that time, and even for jobs that some of these people would have never even applied for. So this whole thing of reservation is such a tricky issue, but I think there's a lot of lack of knowledge. So
That's right.
while we can talk about the big leaders, this, that, but to be honest, we don't really have that in our control. I feel there are smaller battles also that we need to fight. And one of them is that how do we counter this kind of a narrative that, the meritocracy, the best person must win, not realizing that many people are not even in the race. What are you even talking about who's winning or who's losing? So how do we create that kind of an understanding and awareness and empathy? And because so many people just come from lack of information, and they just don't know how bad the situation is. Of course, they're completely complicit, and if they really wanted to know, they would have found out, but most people don't. So in some ways, it's also our job to kind of make sure that more and more people get to know about it.
Agreed, absolutely. And then I just want to maybe just throw one curveball at Suraj. When I moved to the US, it was a complete, sea change in the way I looked at the world. I want to ask you, you've, lived in India, you've lived in Africa. Was there something about the American society that sort of made you go back and, rethink your assumptions, or maybe strengthened your assumptions?
Assumptions about what, Mauktik?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the politics or the social. It's just an open-ended question. Like when you came to the US and saw this kind of a system, it's capitalistic, it is ruthless, this, that, there is a lot of things you can criticize the US for. But at the same time, it's extremely open to inquiry. It is, everything is out in the open in the US. And in that sense, when you came to the US, did you look back and feel like, oh, I was wrong when I used to think about life or think about the caste system or whatever when I was in India, and when I came to the US and my perspective changed? It doesn't have to be a specific topic or issue, open-ended.
Right. My experience is different, Mauktik. I grew up in Nandita is a very small town. It's like nobody. One of the things I'm enjoying about this conversation is that you are a non-Western Maharashtrian Brahmin. And I think that's more comforting than to talk to, the usual suspects of Pune, Bombay Brahmins. But in Nanded, where I grew up under a inferiority complex. And caste does that. Caste does two things, depending on which place you are. One is it grants you, like your friend did to you, Mauktik, where he or rather they, whatever gender they are, is to identify that we can't do wrong. So there is a superiority that grants to you, where you feel like you own the world, and a lot of things can be happen because a system is there, because the mental block is removed out of you. For me, when I grew up as I felt inferior. I didn't like my hair that I grow now. I didn't like the way I looked. I mean, these are all the kind of complexions that bring to you. But also, what that did was to connect my own, my past as something irrelevant, because you open Rama and Mahabharata, the epics, right? First of all, people don't know that there are multiple versions of Ramayana, and Ram means different to different people. So when these were shown, the people demons belong to my background. And I think that's a very telling experience where I don't find myself as being a god or a creator of the universe. I find myself as a demon or on the wrong side of the history. Then when they talk about Ravana, now Ravan, for some of us, he's our ancestor. But for some, he's a demon. So these are the kind of experiential categories that are imposed to you as a legitimate form. It's like white people's Columbus of America. Now you are living here as a person of color. Would you at all accept Columbus as an icon to be revered in this country that was colonized and wiped off close to 12 million Native Americans over the long period of time? Indian histories have not recorded those genocides committed upon the Adivasis or upon the Dalits. They were written off as wars of good over evil. They were given a certain prescriptive discourse of how one looks to one's current location. Now, if you ask me, now coming about the question of how did it come about? When I left India, when I left Nandita, I felt I was in Bombay. I was working. I got a job in all corporate sector and all. Because I had a whatever degree and all, I got job as and the people I was working with were all upper caste people. And boy, I tell you, they were not talented. I had to literally tutor them. I've literally do hand holding. Even though I came as a late guy, they were working there for some time. What that meant was, I could be in a position to prove my credentials, but still, I was constantly questioned about how I navigated certain issues. And of course, my Facebook post and everything was all about Ambedkar, my Dalit identity, and that one thing I never gave a damn was about my caste. I mean, I was never ever going to give up, because I grew up in the movement. But now, in UK, in South Africa, in Switzerland, in UN, and wherever I worked in, one thing that constantly keeps coming is how the oppressed around the world are cooperating in this space. And you would know, and many people in the audience would know, that the black people here created their own media and culture industry. And then they established themselves as someone who could be co-makers of this moment. So when I was looking at this issue and I saw white people willing to, at least to some extent, and again I'm putting this comparison with Indian upper caste, Indian caste system makes you insecure, and that's why you are so hell-bent on holding on to your own privileges, because you don't know how to rationalize your atrocious position. And that's why I have created meritocratic argument, I have created hard work argument, so I met a guy, and here's the funny thing, it would not have been possible. He was from my same town. He was belonging to the upper caste. And we met in England. We were both students. Back in India, I was still having intimidations towards him, because there we were classmates and we were like good friends. But when I came to India, his father was like a big landowner. We went to their house. My house is still in slum. His house was big. What that meant was, there was an asymmetry. Even though I have the skill, I have the knowledge, I have PhD, I have whatnot, you call it, that my friend had, but he had an upper edge. And I think this is the conversation where we need to now pull out of our own complexes and have a candid conversation. Because I'm telling you, this is the work of this generation, so that next generation can literally live with some guidance. Caste makes you blinded, especially if you're coming from the privileged side. And many people don't know that in a democratic country, the resources need to be distributed. I will just give you two surveys. One is about the corporate board members of India. It's a survey done and it's published in Economic and Political Weekly. 44% of the CEOs or the corporate executives, the C-suites, were Brahmins alone. And 42 were Baniyas. Khatris were not even there. So now you can attribute that to a merit, that we are hardworking and all. But very rarely you will understand that the position you got was created by an established safe network. You can flaunt your Brahmin identity, you can talk about your Brahmin background without feeling intimidated. Whereas I cannot be a Dalit. I cannot celebrate my ancestors. You will celebrate Ganpati Puja and all the Hindu festivals without having to account for it. I can't celebrate Ambedkar Jayanti. I can't celebrate Buddha or any other ancestor's Jayanti. I will not even have absolute recognition if I say Jai Bhim. Whereas they will go about all kinds of things. Even Muslims have right to say Salam Alaikum and they have their own religions and other people will have a relation. But with Dalits, it's an absolute hatred of exclusion where I won't be able to at all, even declare. So if I'm working in office, I will make sure if I want to get promotion or if I want to be safe, I will not recognize, I will not open my identity to it. And this is how we see a flip of a conversation that takes place. That was the first survey of CEOs. Now the wealth distribution. Within the wealth distribution, 48% of the national average wealth was owned by Brahmins alone. Who will account for it? This is the public resources. It belongs to everybody. But we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about reservation. We want to talk about Mayawati. We want to talk about someone who is a rich Dalit. And by the way, people might not know, not more than 3% Dalits have university degrees. So we're not even talking about 97% Dalits who are deprived of these resources. Whereas Brahmins, on the other hand, are not more than 4% and own an enormous amount of wealth. I'm not even saying income or location, the wealth that they have. When will we start accounting for it? Then there are temples, the temple land that they belong to. That's why we had a conversation last time, because if there is a heterogeneity among Brahmin caste, that needs to be discussed, because the most rich Brahmins, and in India you can go with the companies, the Nilekanis and Murtis, and the big, especially in the techno capital, but also historical capital, the Baniyas. These two communities continue to amass the wealth of the people. And if you are rich in a democratic country, that means you are making someone else poor. You are not there because you have talent. You are not there because you are trying to create something new. You are there simply because your oppression is making you rich. And in a country where people are poor, where people are beggars, and India is a leader in world when it comes to poverty numbers, how can we afford that status to the people? And yet still, our people from the dominant caste continue to dream, especially students, that after my 12th, I will go and study engineering or medicine, and then I'll go to foreign country. I will either do PhD or I will do a job, Tata consultancy, Falam Bistana, and that's how we see this is being played out. And so when I look through the American vantage point, Mauktik, I look at India is not yet, it is a capitalist country, but it literally presents, there is a constitution that is written socialist, it writes about redistribution of resources, the directive principles are such fascinating document, but yet what we do is, we do not pay account to the experience of Dalits, and I think we need to start a conversation, because we cannot afford to live in a mythical reality that is not in the making. Why does Dalit have to feel inferior without even being then tested? So there are and for me, I have to constantly prove. Now I don't have to, but when I was growing, I had to constantly, if I write something, if I talk to something, I always had to make sure I provide some citations, I provide some experiences, or I provide some support to base my argument. And I think these are the kind of complexities that we need to come to term with.
That's great. I think these are the issues that I wanted, at least friends of mine who've joined, I wanted them to hear the reality from you. So I'm glad, we can probably move on to, questions from the audience.
So what we will do, people are sending questions. We will take a few, and I will direct those questions at you both, and also I will also answer if that's okay with you guys.
I think you've muted Nandita. Nandita wants to say something. If you want to unmute her, yeah.
Is she? I mean, I don't know why she. Let me try one more time because she is unmuted by legit.
Yeah, now it's better.
Nandita,
No,
can you speak?
Yeah, now I couldn't unmute myself because you had muted. I don't know. It said host needs to mute.
I think my Zoom has this is totally my
No
Zoom
problem.
is acting up today, guys. My apologies for that.
There are bigger problems, as we know, so we don't need to worry about it. No, that's why I just wanted to say that equity is very important. While we are talking about equality and all of that, we really have to address the issues of equity, about affirmative action, because also what are we to do? We know what the huge issues are, but what are we to do? How do we help each other? How do we empower each other to fight this battle? Because it's an enormous battle. It's not going to, there is a unsaid almost conspiracy to keep it the way it is. It serves the powers to be. And but while I understand your anger also and all the factual things, you are right. My only humble submission is that there are some of us, maybe very few in number, but we do not want you to see us as the other. We do not want to be clubbed with, because if I don't really practice any religion, I don't practice any caste, I really feel that together we are stronger than apart. It's like, it's the same feminist movement. As a woman, there are a lot of things that I suffer with, but I cannot generalize and say every man. And also, if there are a lot of men who have that kind of a bias or who are oppressive, much of it is because they are also deeply conditioned. So we have to be careful of these binaries sometimes, which I totally get your point and I'm totally with you. So don't get me wrong, but I also want to make this submission that we also have to form strong allies. And that is going to only make us stronger. I don't know what you feel about that and what others feel about it. Like I say Jai Bhim too, and Ambedkar was mine too. And I want to fight this battle too. I just want a better world, where there is more equality, where there is more freedom, where there is none of all these bullshit that divides us constantly. So the anger, I don't want to feel that I'm not defensive about anything. I don't see myself of a particular caste or religion or whatever. Like I said, probably the only identity that I sometimes struggle with, which I kind of tend to own up, is of the woman, because women have also been oppressed for so long. But imagine if you're a Dalit woman, there is a double whammy. Maybe a male Dalit doesn't understand to what extent a Dalit woman suffers. So, we are in some hierarchy of things. Even the Dalit community, it's not like it's one homogeneous community. I'm sure there is upper and lower, and and this is how they keep us divided. And I'm just saying that how do we form these allies that we can fight the real battles?
I think, Nandita, I agree with you. And Suraj, I just probably want to add that, I have probably said this 3 times already. I've been an atheist all along. And even when I write, I constantly talk about constitutional morality, democracy. I think Nancy Pelosi said during impeachment, it's a republic if you can keep it. And, forget about religion and caste. It's really constitutional morality. If we can propagate that, if we can perpetuate that, that is our only hope. And I think, there are enough upper caste Brahmins that I personally know in India who are of that type that, I don't believe in caste. But beyond that, they don't know where to go or what to do. And then, if all you're saying is, I don't believe in caste, you are still being complicit, right? Mm-hmm. And that probably needs to change, and forming alliances, like Nandita said, becomes important in that scenario when there are people, even in upper castes, who want to break these barriers and, create a more
and if I can just add in on this, the alliances with other oppressed people. sometimes we feel like, okay, as women, we have to fight for women. Those who have issues of disability, they must fight for that. Those who are Muslims must fight for that. The point is that how do we also help each other, or sexual orientation, or, so there are so many divisions. I feel there is an intersectionality in all of this. So how do we become allies of those, like you and Suraj in the beginning said, that if you're truly liberal, you have to be anti all of those things that divide us, and those are the alliances that I want to be part of, or that, I want to encourage more people to be part of, where, right. and maybe it's easier for me to say that. Again, I'm taking that as a thing. Maybe it's easier for me to say that. But what else is the solution? I really don't know. How do we create more representation? Like you said, in films, like, forget politics, it's beyond, it's just too sickening. But like in films, because it does influence people. If you keep bombarding a certain kind of thing and say, this is India, you're kind of narrowing India. Or this is, this is how our weddings happen, this is what we eat, this is what we wear, this is how we talk. It's actually a representation of only those few who are dominating that world. So how do we change that? Till everyone doesn't come in and participate, we're not going to change it.
Right. I think, Nandita, to kind of respond to your point is, see, when female or feminists call out male, and they say men are, and there are generalizations made, I don't take that as an offense. I take that as an existential question. It might not affect me, but it certainly does affect women folks. So the argument of not everyone is there is already given in that argument, because when an oppressed speaks, he, she, or they speak to a certain experience. And what that means is, I need to identify if a woman has an issue and I think I can participate. I don't want to go and burden her by saying, why are you saying like this? I am not like this. All I would like to do instead is, okay, I understand your problem. Please let me know, how can I do? What can I do? Let me hear the woman completely. Let me give her attention that I've never given to her. And let me try to ascertain where can I fixate my experience in this program of our movement. And once I am able to understand that, then I will create my space to do something. That doesn't mean I need to go and bombard feminist movements. I can do that, for example, with males. If a female
something, can you guys hear him?
Yeah, Suraj has somehow dropped off. I'm hoping he comes back. Can you hear?
Am I not audible?
Yeah, now you are.
Now you are. Okay, sorry. Finish. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. So what I was saying is, and same applies to the struggle of our sexual minorities and transgender people. I think when we talk about Dalit community, again, that's been always made a differentiation. It's an encompassing struggle, because the struggle against oppression of the oppressed people, and oppressed people can be belonging to the various scope of things, if you know what I mean. And that's why what we can do is, first of all, start having a conversation. Now, I have not seen Brahmins against casteism, Brahmin against Brahminism groups, social groups, where for example, males against sexism. What that means, guys, let us talk about how we inflict harm upon women folks. And whenever we hit a block, we will just ask other women folks to enlighten us, or we will do our own self-reading. We will because it's a process, right? Similarly, I have not seen Baniyas talking about their own extreme capitalist exploitative framework in how their family members should adopt into this. And I think we need to, and as Nandita has said, we need to be made fair, unsettled, unappreciated, because that is the process. Because unless and until we are held accountable, or else it will be very much like a process of charity, where charity is very easy. You will donate certain money and wash your hands, like many of our exploiters do. Go to temple by washing their hands, by giving certain, So what I'm saying is, one is a very programmatic process wherein you can literally write off a check and say, please don't bother me. But also you could adopt a strategy where I'm saying, I want to actually contribute in real transformation, a real change, if you will. And that would mean I need to be called out whenever I messed up. Whenever I am screwing somewhere, something wrong, I need to be called out. And because I think that openness to vulnerability will help you understand the vulnerability of others. If I am not called out for my own, I don't know, patriarchal ways of looking at things, and if somebody doesn't point me that out, I will still feel I'm doing the best job. And believe me, at one point, I was also feeling like that until our female allies or female comrades pointed out that, Suraj, these and these things were not good for you to say, and you have to correct. Immediately you learn that. Oh my God, if I'm unwilling to be vulnerable, I'll just literally show middle finger and say, I'm doing the best job. You don't need to tell me. And this is what is happening.
No, so Suraj, I totally agree. And in fact, to just talk, just sort of go back to Nandita's point, it's just so ironic in India that the whole reason for me to make that movie about backpacking, that documentary that I made, was to showcase the immense diversity of thoughts and backgrounds and religions in India. And so many of my friends have watched the movie and they still, they're just completely blind to, the fact that we are propagating these idea of, India being this or India being that. India is a million different stories. And even after watching a movie like mine, it's just so difficult to break those kinds of barriers that we constantly have to work on it. People just go back home, watch the movie, oh yeah, nice, diversity of India, but then they go back and they're following all these idiotic narratives that are being created today. So, I absolutely agree that, this is like an everyday thing. We constantly have to talk about these issues and keep pointing out, this is wrong, even in our households, not just making movies, but the conversations that we have, it's extremely important to do that. So
should we take some questions, because a lot of people are writing, let's not ignore those. We have a very engaged, I was just looking at it, in fact someone said all the oppressed people should unite, and I'm all for it. And we're all oppressed in some form or the other, so
yeah, we should.
Some more than the others, that's for sure. But yeah, if there's any question.
Yeah, Suraj, you want to lead that? Take some questions, or how do you want to do it?
I don't know. I mean, we can all answer at least one question that has been asked to us. No?
I think Suraj is again.
It says the recording has stopped.
Suraj, okay, please go ahead. Sorry, the internet messed up. Why don't, Mauktik, do you want to, because my internet is shaky at the moment, do you want to, okay, I can do that.
Your recording has stopped, Suraj. Whatever you were doing, we just got a prompt that said recording has stopped. So just look at it.
I think it started again. It's showing a recording. There was a brief drop. It's on again. So Suraj, do you want to go ahead and pick some questions from the audience?
Or if somebody has a question for any one of us, could you just write it again, because it's a long chat. Instead, if it is just written again, we could. Well, somebody has asked me, how do I keep myself motivated when there are so many problems? Well, it's true. I mean, sometimes it's overwhelming because everything seems to be going wrong. I mean, how do you deal with it? Look at this pandemic, what it has thrown, I mean, look at all these migrant workers' stories, the images, it's all around us. I mean, one never realized that even to have a home, is a luxury. Like you never thought that in itself is a big privilege, to have a roof over your head where you can be safe. And we know that even going back, it wasn't all simple, because the Dalits were in fact oppressed even after they reached their villages, and there was segregation. So it's like, it's an unending process, you know. So how do you keep yourself motivated? I think by just giving some little meaning to your own self, your own life, by engaging, because you know you're a drop in the ocean. Even if you do 10 lives like this, the change will not even be perceptible. But you just keep at it, because what choice do you have? That's the only way you know you're alive.
Nandita, this is a question.
Yeah. Well, I can't hear anything. Hello.
Suraj, okay,
Hello?
Suraj, now.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Now go ahead, Suraj.
So the question is, how can a trust be built between non-Dalit and Dalit women, especially from a non-Dalit woman's perspective?
Well, firstly, again, I'm being careful in what I'm saying, only because I know if I say that, I don't think, if I had to define myself, my caste would not even be the 100th thing. It genuinely does not, you know, play a role. So you form alliances based on your common experiences. So between a woman, when you meet another woman, and if you form a sense of sisterhood, it's because you have somewhere a shared sense of experience as women. You know, it's like if you meet a dark-skinned person with another dark-skinned person, you feel like, okay, I know what you've gone through. Everyone's been telling you to not go out in the sun and put this damn cream so that your tan will go, etc. You know, the same stories. Or any bright color is too bright on you, any light color, or the contrast is too much. No color is ever right for you. So, you know, so you form alliances also based on some kind of a shared concern, some kind of a shared experience. And yeah, and I see that kind of sisterhood forming all the time.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Nandita said. You know, something that I've picked up through solo backpacking. It's just asking some very basic questions and being a good listener. You know, I stopped asking questions like, where did you study? You know, what did you do, blah blah blah. I just ask people, what's your story? And I'm willing to listen. And you will be surprised. You know, I understand there is a lot of social structures that prevent us from doing this. You know, especially the oppressed classes in India. They're, you know, inherently, you know, concerned about, you know, how should I approach, how should I ask. But I would really sincerely urge you to just, you know, go and talk to Brahmins. You would be surprised. There are enough Brahmins out there who, you know, don't believe in the caste system, who want to do something about it. But again, they're also stuck in that same bubble where, you know, they don't know where to start that conversation. So, you know, if you just ask very simple, basic questions, what's your story, and are willing to be a good listener, I hope, you know, you'll find, you know, enough of these people who are willing to talk and, you know, do something about it.
I don't even know who is a Brahmin, and you know, how do I? You don't approach people by their caste. If you don't believe in that, then you don't even approach whether it's a Brahmin or somebody. So Mauktik, I will not be able to do that, for instance. One, because I can't make out, like with your name, maybe somebody in Maharashtra can immediately say, okay, if it's Kulkarni, it must be Brahmin, right? Because I'm not looking for those signs, maybe I can't make out from names, even from, let's say, Odia and Odisha and Gujarat, or even Delhi, where I grew up. So why would I want to go to a particular caste and ask their story? I'm interested in human beings. I just want to have, you know, I just want to meet interesting people, empathetic people, compassionate people, people who care. And those are the criteria I would choose for even listening to stories.
So Nandita, I'll agree with you, but I think that is where our privilege comes into the picture, right? Just
possibly, but I'm just saying that we have to also be careful of not falling into that trap. You know, like I never want to be justifying saying, oh, there are also good Hindus. Of course, there are good Hindus and there are good Muslims. I don't want that language. Maybe I'm feeling very strongly. I just don't want to use that language, because that language makes no sense to me. That's not the language I want to be abstracted. I'm just saying that sometimes, like you were saying, maybe there is something good in Hinduism. Well, if it is, please do practice it in your home. Do what you want to do. Just, I don't want to know about it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to. Of course, there must be some good in everything. But the point is, that's not my inquiry. So I'm just saying, I don't mean it against you or anything. I'm just saying that, why are we using that same vocabulary? That's all.
I agree. But I think, I'll just quickly finish my point. And, I think...
the question is also for you. So why don't you club this together?
Yeah, sure, please.
So the question is, that many diaspora, how would, so some people are in diaspora, and also their kids are growing up in diaspora. And someone who has lived in diaspora yourself, do you have any, maybe suggestions, guidance, or something that you would like to offer to them? And especially, Mauktik, talk through your own experiences of coming to reckon your own privilege, and more importantly, where people are saying, what are the transformations you would like to give to them? Like, what were those tipping points? Because there are many Brahmins who are writing to me on this chat who would like to know the advice from you.
Right. So, I would start with two sort of tipping points. In fact, just going back to what Nandita was saying, I think my comment was really related to what Suraj was saying. Like Suraj said,
I'm not. I didn't mean to say
right.
He came to. I'm just saying generally.
Right. I think that inhibition, we probably don't feel it or we don't see it, but there is a lot of inhibition when you've grown up in a certain kind of oppression. You feel worried about even approaching and asking questions. So that's why I was saying...
No, that I totally agree. I think...
Correct, yeah. So that one, and then now coming back to these two issues. So there were two clear tipping points that I remember. I mean, one was I had lived in such an extreme bubble that, I constantly thought that, Brahmins are, a significant chunk of India, and this is how brainwashed you can become. My understanding until coming to the US was, Brahmins are at least 20-25% of India. I came here and I was talking to some
they are controlling a lot. They control a lot, maybe more than 20-25, but they are not that significant. That's the irony.
Less than 5%, right? And that was sort of my first tipping point. I came to the US and, some of these conversations with, my friends, roommates. And when I found out that, man, after millennia of oppression, this is what we've created. That somebody like me can be completely brainwashed to believe that, we are everywhere. That was one tipping point. And the second tipping point, as I mentioned, was, really studying neuroscience and understanding how these small little things in childhood can completely change the trajectory of your life. The kinds of experiences you get. There is a lot of talk in neuroscience about deprivation, sensory deprivation. Right? If you don't have enough diverse set of experiences, or or you're not being stimulated with different kinds of thoughts or different kinds of ideologies, you can literally either pigeonhole yourself into believing something that I believe, which is, we are superior, we are, 25% of the population or whatever, or be completely ignorant of what oppressed people go through. You can still claim that, I don't believe in caste and I don't see caste, but until you are speaking against that and, against and what it does to your brain development, I think that was my, second tipping point. And what am I doing about it? All you have to do is, go and talk to my parents and they will tell you what I'm doing about it. I don't know if they're listening in, but these are the conversations I started having first at my home. And I started telling my parents, I'm like, I'm not a Brahmin. I'm not even a Hindu, and it gives so much grief to my mom, even every time I leave home, she wants me to pray to God and this and that. And I still do it, just to make her happy. But, I've blatantly told my parents about this. I have finally started talking against my family in public. That was probably the most difficult thing for me to do, where, as I said in my opening comments, I just can't deny the amount of social service everyone in my family has done, and still, you know, they're part of the oppression. And that has to be called out. I think that begins at home. You can't be, this sort of, do-gooder to the outside world, and then, when you come back home, you are propagating the same kinds of, social structures that lead to oppression. So I think two tipping points, and then what am I doing about it? At least, being vocal and open about it, and trying to address these issues.
Thank you. So Nandita, so this is the final round. So to you, there is a question, and there are a lot. So I will try to justify the questions. There are like, I'm going to share with you the chat window, and you guys can later check. But so one conversation that is often coming is, you operate in a film industry, obviously, and so how
on the
would
fringes.
you think of, for example, say what?
I said very much on the fringes. So I can't be responsible for their prejudices and choices. But yes, but I can try and share what I feel about it. I feel like an outsider too.
Oh wow. So so there has been a lot of conversations around Muslims, and then there is at least a sensitivity within the film industry towards Muslim issues. Limited compared. I'm comparing with Dalit and Adivasi.
Yeah, of course.
And there is a
there is a very narrow understanding of the Dalit and Adivasi issues, and even the films that have happened, they are very stereotypical. Most of them, at least. Anyway, there are like 0.1%. Within that, 80% are very stereotypical. There'll be like one off film that actually brings out those nuances and those struggles. And it's happening in media. It's unless something is very sensational. I mean, look at the Kherlanji case. What happened after that? Even though it was out there in the open, are there follow-ups to these cases? Because who's speaking for them? Who's speaking for those cases or whatever happened? Where is that kind of leadership? I think, there is, we are followers. We are largely followers. And we need some strong leadership, maybe. I don't know what the solution is, but I know that these kind of things, despite 24-hour news channels, despite 2,000 films, the largest film producing country in the world, and it's still not representative of the reality. And now, in fact, when I'm trying to make these films, people are saying, oh, everyone's coming out of the pandemic. People want light films. They want entertaining. They want happy films. Please don't do one of those serious things. Oh, you're too political. Nobody wants to see this kind of stuff. So it's a struggle. I can tell you, for a filmmaker like me, it's definitely, we're all kind of struggling too.
So the reason I bring this up is because, Nandita, historically, and also I'm looking at other experiences, America as well as Latin America or Africa. There was, for example, third world cinema. There was a black cinema. There was always this alternating genres.
There was protests and would like Black Lives Matter, would that happen here? I sometimes wonder,
But here, Taylor Swift calls out the white Confederates who are responsible for, imploding slavery in the society. I haven't seen, and whatever worth that celebrity is, I don't even, even condemning a recent massacre of a family, and then we see Vikas Jadhav getting killed. Then there is a Balmiki in Uttar Pradesh who got hacked to death. And then recently there was an intercaste marriage in Pune, and the boy was dead. The family hacked him to death. I haven't seen any heartless, these people with their million followers or their influence even raised. So what shame do these people have that they fit into the rectangular screen of a cinematic exposure when their superiors, and I use superiors in a very mean way, looking at Hollywood, continue to condemn? like for example, after this George Floyd happened, there were about 26 celebrities, white celebrities, who came out with a joint video, and they called out their location, and they were like, we have to do more. So there is a certain openness. So Mauktik, when you say the Indian Hindu temple, caste and all, people are not courageous even to self-examine. So Nandita, the question again is there a space that we can perhaps create with, and of course it's going to be disruptive, but it's going to be a good disruption, because it's a disruption of the non-belonging. And someone like you who has a certain space, although you say marginal, but we think it's important for us. Do you think there perhaps is a moment for us to at least create a conversation? And I know Neeraj, Paranjeet, Niharika Singh, and Nagraj, they are good friends, and we did a panel on Dalit cinema here at Harvard. They have been doing, but then again, that's a silo, right? Why don't these dominant non-Dalit caste? Yeah.
No, that's what I'm trying to do, and it's not easy, because see, like, again, it goes to that kind of exclusion that has become normalized. If you put in Dalits killed for, you will see killed for being on a horse, killed for keeping a mustache, killed for all kinds of, just normal things. And so there is a certain acceptance of it. It's not part of our conversation. That is the reality. And that will only change when we change those stories. And that's why, because there are many from the community today, my imploration, that's why is, if I was maybe in another panel, I would have, not said this, but I really feel that as a non-Dalit, am I allowed, or is it legitimate for me to tell this story? Now, I need to be more informed. I need to take enough people in confidence. I need to do my research. It's the same. Am I allowed to tell Manto's story? It was 70 years ago. I haven't gone through partition. I don't know what it is for a Muslim man who didn't wear his religion on his sleeves to be, and a city that he loved in Bombay, he had to go to Lahore. Am I really allowed to tell that? Am I entitled to tell that? I think we have to trust. We have to, again, I'm going back to the same thing, maybe the boring thing of alliance, but I do feel that we have to trust. We have to know who are our friends, what kind of solidarity that we create, because then our stories will come out. Otherwise they will control the narrative. It suits people not to include people like us, saying, oh, you're not right for it, or this is not to be done. Like I was saying, it's not entertaining enough, it's too political. Who are you to do the film? What do you know of it? You can turn around and say, what do you know of our experiences? You don't even know your caste because it's so convenient for you. Yes, it's true. But the point is, should I just because I don't know, should I go back into my shell, or should I say, no, but I want to know. I want to understand your experience, and I want to try and show it in the most authentic, honest way, in the hope that it will touch some lives. Somebody just posted, I just saw it coming out, all lives matter. And you were saying, why in India we don't speak up? We in India don't speak up about anything. If a film is raising something, they are too scared because somebody is going to oppose, we are going to hurt somebody's feeling. People are not putting themselves out. We are not risk takers. We all want to be safe and, make our money and kind of live these navel gazing modes. So, and that has happened in the US. Like, how many people speak about Trump? There has to be space for dissent. Are we standing up for all those people who have been booked for various things that they have not done? Are we going beyond what is our, issue? We all have to do that.
I think I absolutely agree. And just to add one more, aspect to that conversation is, in India, the media, so your media industry and the entertainment industry, these are hopelessly intertwined with the political power. A lot of the money, the funding, the stories, these are dictated by political power. In the US, when you look at the media, when you look at Hollywood, these are professionally run industries. They have their independent minds and they can do whatever they want without the fear of censor board or without the fear of, getting an FIR. In India, we are still fighting those battles. These democratic institutions and professionalism in our industries, it is still lacking. And until we get to that level as a country where we have respect for democratic institutions, and we have these probably some of these big Bollywood studios, they're being run professionally without interference from the censor boards and from the political powers that be. I think we're still going to struggle, and that is another aspect of this.
I want to just add, Suraj, can I just say?
Yeah, please.
Well, only All Lives Matter had come there, so I thought I'm just going to read out, and it's very rightly said. It says, all lives matter is the words of the privileged. That changes the focus from the oppressed with a mere pseudo-generalization. When we say all lives matter, it is to bring out that humanity of it. But within that, obviously, if Black Lives Matter, why are they saying? Because those lives haven't mattered. So in our country, it would be, Dalits lives matters. It would be tribal lives matters. It would be Muslim lives matters. It would be women's lives matters. It would be everybody who's oppressed. And actually, those who are privileged are a very small percentage. Everyone has been now pushed to the wall pretty much in migrant lives matters. So there is no dearth of those who have been pushed to the wall. And obviously, those are the lives we are going to be focusing on. So just to clarify to the gentleman who raised that,
I think just to put this to a brief closure, one thing that has happened today is to bring out this a very important conversation much needed. And I think some of the conscious people on the panel, and I believe everybody is, with whatever little they are, we should hold accountable the society as well as the power brokers of society. Be it Bollywood or be it any other film industry, we should call them out. How ironical it was of Kareena Kapoor and the Saif Ali Khan's and her daughter, I don't remember her name, and Atul Kasbekar and all, to sport a All Lives Matter hashtag. And then that again doesn't surprise me, because that's what been their anthem. And I think there has to be a very sound criticism, and I think social media plays a very important role.
And they did. They were called out, saying you have opposed dark-skinned people, you have gone for obsession with fairness and all of that, and then you're saying Black Lives Matter. There is an hypocrisy there, and I think some of them were called out.
And I think if we kind of continue to reciprocate this kind of a hierarchical system, then I think we really have a problem. Then I think women, especially on this panel, and I don't want to mansplain, but through a specific locus point, women have very little investment in Brahmanism, if you think in a longer term, because it is against them too. And I think it is the dominant caste women who need to now take the leadership within their own communities and start a space where they kind of tutor, school, educate their own parents and families. And I think the conversation is going to be difficult, but it could begin by not exclusively and obsessively focus on what caste doesn't give as opposed to what caste gives to you. And I think the privileges play a very important role in for us to be held accountable. I was also not held accountable for my various privileges that I had. But then when I was made, I chose to hear them and to follow them. And I think it's the story of everybody. Before I put a closure, I would just like to, do you all have any final quick thoughts? You and Nandita, you and Mauktik?
No, I think there's a lot of conversation about the privileged and not privileged. I think it is the job of the privileged to educate themselves, to, if they are thinking, caring, privileged, then the least you can do with your privilege is to do some good. Why should always the burden be on the oppressed to change things? Of course, they have to protest and fight and all of that. But I think just to say, yes, we are privileged and, we were ignorant is not enough. If you are becoming aware, then we've got to do something more actively. There's no question about it, and need all your help for the film that, I'm going to hopefully make if I get some takers, because it's not going to be easy to raise funds for a film like this. But the world shall conspire, hopefully. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this, because it was really Jai Bhim.
No, I think I'll end with what I'd hinted at earlier, that at a lot of times it may feel like, oh my god, this is an overwhelming problem, and there are so many actors involved in this, that is there anything I can do to make a change? And I think we can, uh, even if we just initiate a dialogue. That is something that I have learned a lot, through backpacking. You just ask to the person sitting next to you, boss, what's your story? I just want to know what your life has been like till now. And you'll be surprised. That's why I'm saying, to forming these alliances, you will find a lot of people in upper caste, especially those who've been exposed internationally. They've studied in different countries, and they really look back at India, and they say, oh my god, we are such a hopelessly divided and system. So there are enough people who want to do something, but if we just initiate those conversations, we'll be able to form a lot of alliances as we go forward.
Well, that brings us to a very robust and very exciting conversation. This was probably one of our ways to go into the deep features of our own insecurities and at the darker rooms that we never foray into. Thank you, Mauktik, and thank you, Nandita, for being candid with us, for your time, for this exciting and engaging conversation. I'm sure people have enjoyed. I would just like to apologize that the YouTube thing didn't work, because I have to go and fight with my internet service provider. But it's live on Facebook, so you can view it. Please, next session we are going to do is mostly on Baniyas and the problem among the caste in Baniyas, the Vaishya community. So you are all welcome to join. Stay on our list, and then please stay strong and keep happy. Keep everyone happy.
Thank you very much.